that is something, by the way, that everybody could agree on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've done that piece in front of, I know conservative audiences and more liberal, and people are screaming during the whole thing because it's like we can all relate to that, and politicians on both sides are fucking us over. And shit, man, maybe that's why politicians want to keep us so divided, because if we actually got together in the same room and talked, we'd realize that we're all kind of being fucked over by the same shit.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We have special guest today, Jamie Kilstein. What's the difference between Steen and Stein?
Nothing. I feel like bullies in elementary school were so preoccupied with the girly first name that they just kind of let the last name slide, and anyone who would pronounce it semi-correctly, I was fine with it.
This was before Jamie Lannister, of course.
Yes.
Who kind of brought the name back a little bit.
Yeah, you just got to fuck your sister, kick a kid out the window,
yeah. Well,
and then it's masculine again.
He pushed him.
He did.
He also strangled his cousin.
Yeah.
But, the things we do for love, right? So
yeah, we believe in forgiveness and redemption on this show.
Not so much. I guess I do, but that doesn't expunge accountability.
Sure. I don't know why in my head, I think I just made it cooler in my head. He push kicked the kid out the window. But you're right. He just kind of daintily shoved him out the window.
Yeah, he looked back over his shoulder and he said the things we do for love and pushed him out the window.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Oh, I forgot he had that good line, though. That's better than my push kick.
I remember it because the kid repeated it back to him in season 7 or 8, whatever the last season was. So you're somewhat familiar with this show, right?
Yeah. No. I'm actually, this is not just kissing your ass. I'm a fan of it.
Why?
I feel like there are... I feel like there are so many shows right now that profit off of divisiveness. And me and you have been dragged into political shit. We talk about politics. Obviously, we have points of view and sides, which is good and fine. That's better than apathy, right? But there's a difference between stating your opinion with an open mind while searching for solutions. And I'm just going to pick my side, blindly defend my side, completely shit roast the other side, even when I kind of agree with them, never question my side, and then let alone do things that the people on Twitter will never see, like you talk about, picking up trash. I've quoted you on a bazillion podcasts about that. Just to make the world better, where it's yeah, man, if we're not doing it for retweets, then it doesn't count. And by the way, I've been totally guilty of all of this.
Sure.
The first half of my life was that. It was thinking I was helping people when in reality it was just for my ego, for celebrities following me on Twitter. And I didn't think I was doing it because I'm but I'm doing it for a good reason. But you can totally get sucked into even doing altruistic things totally for you and for praise. And I feel like this is finally a place where it can be hey man, we can disagree, but how can we make the world better? And it sounds so easy and cliche, but it's fucking super rare.
Sure. Yeah, I guess that's been going on for a while. Confirmation bias is nothing new. And I think the modern Western political climate is some confluence of confirmation bias and a very narrow view of kin selection, how you decide who is and is not part of your group or tribe or family or whatever, right?
Right.
And ultimately, this has been the case throughout all of human history. It seems to turn into the more active and involved the people get, the mob, I guess if you're going to call it that, the more likely it is that people get involved in hero worship or, hero worship of an individual or of a party or something like that.
Yeah, man. I mean, I was a grown-ass man who considered myself, whatever, a political pundit or whatever. I made my living talking about that stuff. And I remember I would go on Twitter, and when I saw something trending, I wouldn't go read, the Washington Post account of the thing that would happen. I would just look to see how the people I already followed and I already liked, how did they feel about it? And then my hot take wouldn't come off of the news article. It would come off of how my tribe already feels, right? So there's like a school shooting. I wouldn't read about what happened. I wouldn't read about, if maybe the guy who stopped the shooter had a gun. I was an anti-gun left-wing guy. So whatever my people were already saying, I would just reframe it into some kind of joke. Oh, I guess people need guns because they have small dicks, blah, 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 whatever. But not actually looking into what happened. And then what's so great and evil about Twitter is by the time you realize your narrative isn't even true, they've moved on to trying to fucking take out someone else, and no one's even paying attention. There aren't not redactions. There aren't like corrections that come, and if they do, it's kind of too late. And that was before the algorithms were as bad as they are now, where even if you are trying to see outside of your tribe, you're just being shown the same fucking 10 people over and over again anyway.
Yeah, I mean, why do you think that happens for people?
I think for me, it was a combination of just I was super depressed and I was miserable, and it's addicting. It's addicting like anything, right? Porn, food, drugs, whatever. Like you're getting these dopamine rushes. My friend Johan Hari wrote this book called Lost Connections, which is the only book that both Hillary Clinton and Tucker Carlson blurbed. So that kind of shows you there's not a political agenda. And it's all about how depression is on the rise because we've lost connection. So many of us think that. Do you remember when we went to that fucking concert, how like almost tear felt happy I was? Because I was like, is this what friends do? And it was legitimately because for so long, really until I moved to Austin, all of my friends were online, and you tell yourself you have these tribes, and you tell yourself you have people that have your back, and you fucking don't. We need real connection, and Twitter is this. I mean, it's essentially porn for friendship, right? Like you think that it feels good. It feels for a millisecond. You're fucking a hot chick, and then you come and you're just like, oh God, why was I retweeting Sean King? Like it's just suddenly like all of that, like the bubbles popped. So I think we're craving connection, and we will also be fine with this artificial metaverse, universe of connection. And then you throw politics on top of it. And, so for me, one, I was depressed. I was acting out. It was the only place I had real friends. Two, I think with politics, you feel like you're doing something for a cause that feels more self-righteous. You're not just gossiping about the Kardashians on Twitter. You are, starting a movement. And it's fucking easy. Marching in the street is hard. A lot of what's wrong with our political system, like elections, it's boring. And so you can feel really helpless, like you can't change anything, but you can scream at your aunt for 3 paragraphs on fucking Facebook.
Yeah, but your aunt's a cunt though, so it's like, what are you going to do?
Yeah, but I mean, people literally, they'll spend all day doing that, and you go, and these are adults, and you go, you fucking out of your mind? Yeah. And it's because that's the only place they feel heard, and they're getting artificial validation from it. And then you add the fact that it's for a quote unquote cause. Yeah.
You're moralizing, searching out your dopamine hit without actually doing any work.
That's what
which is kind of upsetting.
Yeah, it would be like if you were watching porn and you're like, I'm doing this for women to really like support sex workers.
I mean, it makes sense from a fight or flight standpoint to minimize your risk while still getting the dopamine hit without actually having to expose yourself to anything, right? So if you were an animal and there was an abundant source of food that you didn't have to fight other animals for, I mean, maybe over time you become domesticated and now you're a little snout dog that can't breathe properly. You know what I mean? Right. That's how, like, we've gone from dire wolves to Boston Terriers over the course of 500 years.
Totally.
Which I like Boston Terriers. I own 2 of them.
Yes.
But, probably not the best idea for a sentient, conscious, community-based human being because it does kind of isolate you over time.
I wanted to ask you a question that kind of ties into all this that I just thought about. When you post, like, let's say clips on Instagram or whatever, do you notice that, because this is another thing, it's me and your job, right? So as good as we can be outside of here, It's so like Cal Newport's a really good friend of mine, and he's the dude who he wrote Digital Minimalism and Deep Work, had that big TED talk about being off social media. And, he goes on like Lex Fridman and Tim Ferriss's podcast all the time. And he always tells me I got to get off social media. It's so toxic. And then I always tell him, cool, get me on Tim Ferriss's show. And then when I'm famous and have a book deal, I promise I will delete Twitter forever. But we talk about this a lot, where a lot of times you are rewarded for shitty behavior. So like you with this show, I know the show's doing well, but when you post clips about, say, something you can do to make the world better versus maybe... And the same thing happens to me when you're, let's say, a Drinking Bros clip where you're just like shitting on someone. Do the positive, hey, let's go pick up trash ones ever do well? Like comparatively? Because I feel like the system also makes it hard for you to, if you tweet something about fucking Milo compared to if you're like, hey, I really liked the new Pinocchio movie. Like, which one do you think is going to do well?
Challenging people doesn't typically go well.
Right. Right.
Because people don't like to be challenged. I mean, I don't either,
yeah.
I guess. But that's kind of the purpose. I would say that the entertainment portion is the lubricant or the alcohol that loosens up the social sphere so you can drive your point across.
So it gets people, so the clips get people to the longer form gets to the deeper message.
That would be preferable, but also I like saying funny shit and doing funny shit. So
Same.
I'm not going to stop doing it.
Right.
And I don't think it would be appropriate to do so.
Well, I don't think you should either. I think both of those, you're right. I think that, while stand-up has had challenges for me, like mentally, it's also the place where I can get in front of a room full of people who disagree with me, and with a well-placed dick joke can suddenly 2 jokes later have them clapping about bringing the country together.
Right.
And if I wasn't funny and if I was preachy, which by the way, old comedian version of me wasn't that funny and was very preachy, my tribe would clap for me.
Sure.
But who gives a shit if you're not actually changing people's minds?
Yeah, that was comedy from 2016 until relatively recently.
Yeah.
It was this all like Trump hate.
Yeah. What I'm proud of, there aren't many things I'm proud of, and I'm proud of this because it just fucked me career-wise, is the trajectory of my comedy. So I started to kind of take off and be political after 9/11 in New York City, where like politics wasn't popular. Then Bush is out of office. Obama goes on. I'm being like applauded as this big liberal guy, but Obama was doing some of the same shit that I criticized Bush for. So when I got on Conan, I did a whole rant about drone strikes under Obama. It was apparently the most complaints they ever got. And then Trump gets in office. Finally, being a political comedian is something that'll be rewarded. And I thought exactly what you thought. And I was like, fuck this. This is hacky. And for the first time in my life, I talked about like relationships. And I was like, I'm not going to be like, he's orange. Like that shit was so, it's not punching down, but it was as hacky as the people on the left talk about punching down is.
Yeah, I don't care about punching down. I punch in every possible direction.
Punch just wildly, like windmill arms. Yeah, man, be funny. I mean, laughter. Look, at this point, everyone's so fucking miserable, and that laughter, making jokes in general, no matter what it's about, what direction you're punching, it is an act of political defiance.
Sure, yeah. I think it's our tolerance for discomfort has grown so strong that the potential for having any kind of like politically flexible or nuanced conversation is difficult for a lot of folks.
Yep.
Because if I sit here and listen to you give your point of view, a lot of people will read that as my tacit endorsement of your point of view, which is not true. That's fucking stupid.
No, you're being a grown-up.
Yeah. And it's, that kind of virtue signaling. It's like obviously super dangerous for the discourse generally, but I think it's like the equivalent of taking a pill instead of working out or eating right. You know what I mean? Like
totally.
You get a dopamine hit because you put a Ukrainian flag in your bio and fucking said that Trump sucks. Like,
yeah,
good
and you're
for
like,
you.
I pretty much saved Ukraine. Yeah, man. I and again, I've done that before, and it doesn't, I've had people get mad at me. I've been calling myself a bleeding heart centrist. I'm definitely leaning a little more conservative, but I'm in the center, or maybe libertarian is a better way to put it.
Well, I mean, it's reasonable when leftists are out of control to appear conservative, and it's reasonable when conservatives are out of control to appear leftist.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So like, who knows? Maybe I'm still liberal and I'm just like, you guys are fucking going crazy. But I remember, I lost a ton of fans when I was more liberal than I am now. But I went on Glenn Beck's show a couple times. And to me, look, me and you and your audience, we can have the conversation about talking to people who you disagree with, all that stuff. It's good for the country, blah, blah, blah. But let's say not even for this audience. Let's just say for your average lefty. When I had people canceling the Patreon or getting mad, I was trying to tell them, hey, you should be happy. You should be happy that someone who agrees with you is getting on a platform with a conservative who has millions of followers and talking about things you agree with. And by the way, getting Glenn to agree with that stuff, getting Glenn, every time I would criticize the left, Glenn would jump in, which is why I like him so much, and he'd criticize the right for doing it. It's what you do too. And so isn't that a good thing? And if they don't care, that to me says you don't actually care about the cause. You're just treating this like sports.
Yeah, you're just a T-shirt fan of a college at this point, which is kind of pathetic.
That's exactly what it is. Instead of like, yeah, man, you should be thrilled. If there's some lefty who's going on a hardcore conservative show, how many people is he getting that message across to instead of just the usual bubble where you guys are just jerking each other off and being like, whatever.
Yeah, I'm not really interested in echo chambers. It just, the second time I hear something, it makes me mad.
Right.
And I think to the point,
I've heard you even on this show, like someone who agrees with you and they will say something where they agree and then you'll push back on the thing you just agreed with, which is great. You're just asking questions about it. It's nothing like bad, but it's like, it's true exploration of an idea instead of just, patting each other. You sounded mad when I said I was a fan of the show. That's interesting.
No, that's just me being awkward.
Yeah. You're like, prove it.
Yeah. But the point you're making, I think healthcare is I can have a conversation about healthcare with anybody from any political leaning, provided they're not a lunatic.
Yeah.
And convince them that their side is wrong.
Right.
Right. So the conservatives are wrong for this pull yourself up by your bootstraps idea that somehow in the richest country in the history of the world, you can be as healthy as you can afford to be seems immoral to me.
Yep.
Right. But the idea that government should be in control of things is fucking stupid.
Right.
And it's relatively easy to make both of those points.
Yeah.
Like, especially with healthcare. I mean, look at all the problems with healthcare are very demonstrable in the data sense, but also everybody has their own anecdotal version of it.
Yeah,
like
it's evil.
Trying to get onto the exchange for the first 2 weeks and the website didn't work.
Right.
That you couldn't have had a better example of government incompetence.
Yeah.
And then, I was very critical of Obamacare when it first began because it's just a handout to insurance companies. Like there's no additional benefit or health care involved there.
Our bar was so low that the fact that he took away something so fucking evil as this pre-existing conditions or, everyone on the left was like, oh, okay, so I'm not going to die if I have cancer. Mm-hmm. And without, noticing that. And that's why, and if you criticized it, because I remember being on the left and criticizing it for that reason from the left. And then liberals would get mad at you and they'd be like, hey, this is such a big deal. Like, and then again, they'd list some low bar thing like the pre-existing conditions.
Well, I had a friend that was running Obama's Midwestern women's campaign during the re-election in 2012. Okay. And when he said that he would not push back on the birth control thing, that he would allow exceptions or that the government would allow exceptions for religious organizations, she quit. Right. And then she went to work for Hillary Clinton, which didn't make any sense to me because she's way worse than Obama.
Way worse.
Hillary Clinton is a war hawk centrist. Yep. She's the same as her husband was, which is he was probably her puppet during that time in office, to be honest. But she's not the leftist that people make her out to be. She's an evil, egotistical piece of shit.
Yep. And
It doesn't matter where. It's so easy for people on the right who can see that because she's not on their side to be like, oh, she's just a crazy fucking liberal leftist. And you're pocketing people in places where they don't belong.
Yep.
So when you go to have a conversation with somebody that might be more of a fan of her than yours, and you start from this premise that is completely incorrect about who she is as a person, then you're fucked. Like, she was against marriage equality, voted for Iraq every single goddamn time. All this stuff trashed the women who her husband raped.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? She, in no way has she ever been a friend to the greater women population or the LGBT, HBV, or whatever the fuck.
Yep.
She's been a piece of shit, war hawk, blue dog Democrat, basically, her entire career.
Well, and then the left will completely lose any credibility when you say that criticizing her, especially when some of these issues do affect women, make you a sexist.
Yeah.
Where it's like, dude, you're making feminism look bad. You're making the Democratic Party look bad. And also, it is so blatantly untrue that who the fuck's going to take you seriously?
Yeah.
You know, I feel like a lot of conservatives felt that way. Yeah, it was really similar to Trump, where it was like, you'd have these conservatives just white knuckling supporting Trump, just like these Democrats white knuckling supporting Hillary. And it's like, hey guys, can we all come together and saying we royally fucked up if those two were our fucking options, or if Biden and Kamala were a fucking option? Like, we've messed up. And so to pretend suddenly, you know, all these liberals supporting Kamala because she's a person of color, even though she locked up so many people of color, it's like, if you don't acknowledge that, you just come off as a liar.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very disingenuous. And, you know, it's difficult to, like, I like people that I can argue with, because if an argument can last more than 2 or 3 rebuttals, then that person actually has a point of view.
Sure.
And we can unpack the point of view and probably come to some kind of consensus at some point, even if we agree to disagree on certain points.
Well, man, I think a lot of it just has to do on a personal level, kind of getting outside of politics. I think a lot of it has to do with confidence. Like, me and you have our mental hangups for sure, but you have to have confidence to be able to have these conversations with people who disagree with you. And I think a lot of these people, especially online, quite honestly, they're pussies. People who spend all day online harassing people or whatever. It's like, oh, you've never been punched in the fucking face. You've never done anything hard before. You've never been in a room with people who disagree with you. And so you can act super self-righteous online and applaud yourself. But if you have confidence, then of course you're going to want to talk to someone who disagrees with you. Of course you're going to want to argue. And you're also, most importantly, going to have the confidence to, if you're wrong, to say, oh shit, I was wrong. Like, I bought, I don't know if you know Jeff Gonzalez, but he brought me to buy my first gun. And he's one of the sheepdog guys. And I was an anti-gun guy. And the reason I was an anti-gun guy is because I only heard anti-gun stuff.
Right.
We have, you know, school shootings no one's psyched about. So you just kind of hear one side of that and you go, all right, well, the problem is guns, right? And it was when I started meeting people and becoming friends with guys like you or Tim Kennedy, who are just men I respect outside of politics and also have this wildly different point of view than I do. And so I go, okay, well, if these are people who I respect outside of politics and they do these things in their everyday life that I would aspire to do, maybe there's something I can fucking learn from them about this thing that I would assume we're enemies on. So then I just asked and I go, hey, what would you do about school shootings? And they have solutions, because of course they do, because they're more experienced than me, an anti-gun fucking person who lived in Park Slope, Brooklyn. And then once that happens, you have to go, well, fuck, man, I didn't know about what do they call it? Like the good neighbor thing. Like, I didn't know the stats about neighborhoods being safer where there's open carry. I just assumed the opposite. And, you know, every left-wing talking point is like, oh, you want, you know, a bunch of idiots in Texas with guns? Like, they're just going to be shooting each other at bars and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then you meet the people with guns and you go, oh, okay. Or when I bought a gun, I just being like, all right, I'm going to be in here every week to practice because I didn't want to have a gun. He goes, and they're just encouraging you. They're like, good. We want responsible gun owners. We don't want these, lunatics who never practice and just think they're going to, stop a movie theater shooting or whatever. But all it took was having the confidence enough to get in the room with people who on paper I thought I was going to wildly disagree with. The first time I hung out with Tim, I was like, well, I guess we're about to hate each other. And now he's such an important part of my life. But that was strictly from having the balls to go in a room and disagree with someone and then being able to look them in the face and be like, oh, I was wrong.
Yeah, it's fine to have prejudicial bias. I think it's not something that you should persist with, but that you should expect yourself to do that because that's what your brain does.
It's natural, yeah.
Your brain creates a four-dimensional picture of a human being or even an idea in some regards because that's what your brain does. It builds patterns.
Yep.
But the critical part is being able to not only challenge the assumptions you and your brain have made, but to actually get involved in the conversation so that your thoughts can be challenged by somebody else.
Right.
And I think that's super uncomfortable for people because they feel like I have no idea why the fuck this is the case. It's Freud would probably have plenty to say about this.
Yeah.
But literally everything you learned from somebody else.
Yeah.
And you were wrong about that thing all the way up until the point that you learned the right version of it.
Right.
That's true for everybody that's ever existed.
Yep.
And somehow that's like one of the biggest offenses, particularly men, take. Like if you correct another man, they take that as some kind of slight or challenge to their fucking masculinity. Like,
coming for my wife?
Like, no, dude, we're just talking, bud.
Yeah, man. Well, so a great example, especially with the man thing, is jiu-jitsu. Is a lot of times the people who are the hardest to coach when they first walk into the door are jacked dudes who were good at another sport. And then a tiny hipster looking fuck like me beats them up. And the excuses start coming, or you feel them using their strength or whatever. And if you walk into jiu-jitsu or any combat sport and you have a natural ability, right? So let's say you're just really big or you're really strong. You can use that to crumble white belts, just beat up white belts. But you're not going to get good, right? And your coaches will tell you, hey, use less strength, put yourself in bad positions, learn the technique, and you will get good. And that is the choice you're talking about with politics, where they have that option where it's like, well, I can do the right thing. And that means being humbled. And that means tapping out to the girl. That means, whatever, maybe looking dumb, feeling dumb, but I'm going to get good. Or I could just murder people for my ego, other white belts, still getting my ass kicked by the technical blue belts, whatever, never get good, and forever just be the strong white belt. And for me, when I started seriously training jiu-jitsu, it was at Marcelo Garcia's in New York, who's like the greatest of all time. I was a little older. It was after doing comedy for a while, so I was super out of shape. And I did not submit one person until I got my fucking blue belt, until the week before I got my blue belt, which means that was a year and a half of me putting on a stupid white belt, paying money to get beat up like I have some BDSM fetish for a fucking year. But then mid blue belt, because I learned from my mistakes, because I would ask questions after I got my ass kicked instead of hitting the mat or whatever, I started schooling everybody who would fuck me up, who I started with. And then my growth increased at such a higher level once I got past that kind of just like horrible, I'm just getting my ass kicked. And so, yeah, man, sometimes it feels good to just shout your talking points, even if you're wrong. And it would be humbling and suck, and you'd feel like you got your ass kicked if you accept defeat or spar against people who are better than you or who might know more than you, even if they're conservative or whatever. But you will become a better person. You will grow more if you kind of take those lickings in the beginning and then just fucking learn from it.
Yeah. This is 2,000-year-old philosophy, right? Epictetus said this.
Right.
If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid.
Well, it's far less wordy than me.
Yeah, well, he was Greek, so they had a lot of butt sex to do.
They got to hustle, man.
Yeah.
We got boys to fuck.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how we somehow tie our identity. I think this is one of the issues. We tie our identity to these beliefs that we have. And it's been a lot of different things over the years. It's been religion. And if you're looking for an example of that, look at how religion affected the science community during the Dark Ages or here in America with the witch trials and all that stupid shit.
Yeah.
And fundamentalism, generally speaking, globally, has been a problem since, people have been around, really. Yeah. And now we've just transitioned from religion. Sometime in the 1950s or so, it began to politics.
Yep.
Like during the Cold War, especially. So we knew that there was an antagonistic event going on, but who the enemy actually was a bit murky.
Yeah. I mean, I've even heard pastors talk about this, where it's like politics is the new religion. And look, anything in your life, whether it's Jesus, whether it's the Democratic Party, whether it's jujitsu, whatever, the temptation is to lash out at people outside of your tribe. But every one of those things should just make you better as a human. If
anything, you should be evangelical about it.
Yeah.
Like try to convince other people in a meaningful way that what you're saying is true.
By you being a good example, right? So the people who will just scream at you, you're going to hell because you don't believe in Jesus. That's not really helping Jesus's cause, nor is it what he did.
No,
right?
I think the same amount of people who have been converted from some asshole on the street telling them they're going to hell, there's probably the same amount of those people as there are women who have married dudes who just sent them random dick pics.
Right.
It's the same group of people that can be convinced.
You're the dick pic of preachers.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I mean, but it also ties into the political thing where it's just, you're just going to scream at someone who disagrees with you instead of, by the way, doing what Jesus actually would have done, which is go talk to tax collectors, prostitutes, poor people who were actually thrown out of the church or not wanted by the church, and being like, hey, man, let's just all be cool to each other. Right. And it's the same with politics. If some of my compassion came from liberalism, great. If some of my work ethic and toughness came from the Conservative Party, great. But if I'm trying to, which both of those things are true, by the way, but if instead of just doing what Bruce Lee did, which is taking the best from all of these different combat sports and then disregarding what's useless, if instead the old version of me, it's like, I have my tribe. So if you're not liberal, you're an asshole. Or if you're not Christian, you're going to hell. Or if you're not, pro 2A, you're whatever it is. Let your viewpoints make you a better role model. Don't let them make you self-righteous and start alienating everyone else. You should be a good example so people want to be like you, and then they fucking ask you, like I did with Tim. Like I asked him about gun stuff. I asked, I listened to your show for more of whatever, I don't even know if you'd label yourself, libertarianish point of view. Dave Smith's a really good friend of mine, and I'll always go to him for straight libertarian stuff. Because these are people I respect outside of Twitter.
Yeah.
I've seen how Dave backstage talks to his wife and kid. And I go, oh, you're just a good guy. So why wouldn't I assume the best of you for this political thing I'm maybe iffy on in a tweet?
Yeah, you have to wonder. I mean, this is what empathy really is. It's not just helping somebody that needs help. It's like being able to think like another person. That's the real key to empathy. And, it's why social media has ruined the political discourse, because there's not a whole lot of long form conversation on there. It's just bite sized.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
Yep.
I mean, that's when you only have 200 characters or so. Fuck you is a lot easier to say than why I came to the belief
right
that I have come to.
Yeah. Mom emoji, eggplant emoji, cum emoji.
And it doesn't do any, you're not actually doing anything. which is really fucking stupid.
Well, actually, what you're doing is you're probably solidifying their opinion of you.
Maybe, yeah.
In the first place, you're probably just doubling down, because even when I talk about let's say I talk about a liberal issue in front of conservatives or a conservative issue in front of liberals on stage, there's no part of me that thinks, if I'm really funny in front of an all conservative audience, that they're going to go open up like a mom and pop abortion stand, right? But maybe the next time one of their friends is like, man, all liberals are pussy cucks, they're going to be like, I don't know, I saw this one comic and he was really funny and he made fun of the left. And like, all you're trying to do is just open pathways for conversation.
Yeah. And it's like in math class, the reason that you show your work when you're doing a math problem is so that if you come to the wrong conclusion, you could go back and find where you made the mistake.
Yeah.
And you can't really do that if you don't have a conversation. If you just stick to talking points, if it's 240 characters, there's not a whole lot to be done there. And it's, I think this is why we have transitioned over the past 20 years of social media from being rooted in some kind of fundamental logic of some sort and the scientific method even, to a place where we've convinced people somehow, or we've convinced ourselves that our lived experience is an objective reality for everybody else.
Right.
Which is not true. That's the opposite of empathy. That's as ignorant as you could be.
Right.
But it doesn't help either if you're somebody that is thoughtful and logical and to immediately dismiss somebody else's worldview.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because if you think about it, it's essentially affinity-based marketing. I'm trying to meet this person at the intersection of their interest in my product and their interest, generally speaking, whatever it happened to be. So we sell hard seltzer. I put it in front of college football fans. Seems to work out pretty well.
Yeah.
Because they like to drink. They're also getting to the age where they, don't want to fucking drink 10 beers and gain 5 pounds over the weekend.
That's me.
So, yeah, it helps a lot to be able to be empathetic like that and understand people. But it's, in this case, you're marketing ideas and not products.
Right.
And that's what if you're a person that cares about your community and your country, you're a marketer for good ideas. Right. Ultimately, at the end of the day, like sometimes we got to fight, sometimes we have to build, sometimes we have to tear shit up. But no matter what you're doing, how you do something is how you do everything. Yeah, you know what I mean. And we've made a lot of mistakes, and it's very rarely people call themselves centrist and say, "Oh, I'm in the middle." And I think a lot of folks confuse that to mean that the truth is somewhere between what a conservative thinks and what a liberal thinks. And sometimes that is true. But more often it's that one side is more right than the other. Yeah. Right, on this particular issue. But that doesn't mean all the other issues that they talk about, they're correct about.
Well, and also when you look at, I think the term centrist seems so gross because when you are talking about a centrist in Washington, it's usually the Hillary Clinton types. Yeah. And it's like, whereas
it's all the worst from both sides.
Exactly. You know what I mean? And it's usually the most corporate. Yeah. And whereas,
by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but her multiple campaigns, starting with her 2000 senatorial campaign, has taken more money from pharmaceutical companies than any other candidate for any office in the history of this country.
I'm sure. I mean, we could probably house all homeless people around the world with as much as that delusional lady has spent on trying to be the most powerful woman in the world. Yeah. It's so gross when we think about how much money we spend and where that money is coming from.
That's why I was bringing up healthcare, because about 20% or so of the money that we collectively as a country spend on healthcare are for administrative fees for insurance companies. Dennis Miller has been making this point since 2004. We have this 100% of all the money we're going to spend on healthcare, and we give 20% of it to these people that don't actually provide any service. Right. And when the Affordable Care Act came out, or when they first started talking about it in the 2009 period, I was like, all right, this might be something. Like there's a couple of things you can do here. One is get rid of the pre-existing conditions bullshit. Two is make healthcare more affordable for people. So it's like, if I can afford to pay a little more, maybe I do. But if the government is going to get involved, it should get involved insofar as it stops drug companies from gouging the fuck out of us. It stops hospitals. It stops corporate hospitals from charging you $30 for a Tylenol.
Yeah.
That's what you could have done. But instead, you just formalized and solidified the 20% grift.
Yeah.
That's all it did.
Yeah. I have a new...
And 83% of all privately filed bankruptcies are because of unpaid medical expenses. 83%.
My newest piece of stand-up that I actually like is a 4-minute breathless, violent rant against the health insurance companies, and it's so long-winded. I just read it. Like, I haven't even memorized it yet. It was the most angry I've ever written anything. And yeah, it was me trying to get health. I wrote it when I was trying to get health insurance. And that is something, by the way, that everybody could agree on. Like, I've done that piece in front of, I know conservative audiences and more liberal, and people are screaming during the whole thing because it's like we can all relate to that. And politicians on both sides are fucking us over. And, you know, I mean, shit, man, maybe that's why politicians want to keep us so divided. Because if we actually got together in the same room and talked, would realize that we're all kind of being fucked over by the same shit.
Well, there's an old anecdote. A guy who sold slaves from Asia, I believe, to Romans back in the day. I can't remember where I read this, but he was it was somebody in the Roman Senate. He was selling them slaves, and as soon as the the transfer takes place, the the Roman guy removes their collar, right? And they were like, "Why do you do that?" He's like, "Well, we don't have slaves wear collars here." He's like, "Well, why not?" He goes, "Because if they looked around and saw how many of them there were and how few of us there were, then this would never work." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, of course that's why they're doing it.
Right.
It's all about it's about consolidating and maintaining power. If there's no reason for their power to exist, then people will stop believing in it. And like Tinkerbell, governmental power only exists if the people believe in it.
Right.
Like there's even the mob. Like if you don't, this is what Rome really figured out. It's why gladiatorial arts became a thing. Like if you can control and placate the mob, you can do whatever the fuck you want.
That's it.
And Twitter is just a modern gladiatorial arena.
Yeah. Yeah.
But everybody's a fucking pussy. You know what I mean? So
that's the thing. Yeah. Well, there's no physical consequences, which I honestly think one of the things that saved me for my mental health and also just getting me out of all that is that I've fought for so long, where it's like there's accountability if you fuck up. And there is part of me that really, really wishes that the majority of people would either train, know what that's like, or just get smacked in the fucking face for talking shit.
I mean, they would be better off for it.
Yeah. No, it's not even like, haha, I want them to get what's theirs. It's like, no, I want you to become a better person because you're clearly fucking miserable.
It's not punitive. I mean, that's one of the problems we're having. We talked about it earlier with getting the dopamine hit while minimizing exposure or effort, but this is the opposite of that, right? It's like, even though you don't want to do something, when you do it, you feel a sense of accomplishment. And there's all kinds of different psychological studies on this. Maybe the most salient is the IKEA effect.
Yeah.
Which is where you receive something 80% assembled and then you assemble the last 20% and you have a greater sense of ownership in it, even though you just assembled it, right?
That's so funny.
That's a real thing.
Yeah. Swedes.
Well, meatballs, but yeah, that's a real thing, and it's something that we've lost is associating reward with effort.
Yeah.
Now there's the expectation of reward because that's what I expect, and if it doesn't happen, then life isn't fair. Well, you're right. Life is not fair.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you as someone who was all the bad things we talked about up until like, I don't know, a little before quarantine. It's really hard making these changes later in life. And when I'm depressed, I'll get down on myself for sure and be like, man, I wish I fucking found this stuff when I was younger and was either less selfish or did harder things or, you know, talked to people who disagreed with me or just became friends with conservatives and got a gun, like all these things. But even though it's really hard for me right now because I'm making a lot of transitions from things like, not hooking up with a girl, even though it would be fine and it would make us both feel better for a night, like, because I know I want a relationship. So waiting for that to, like just being much more disciplined, hanging out with guys like Tim. These are really hard adjustments. Going down to the stand-up clubs where I would just get drunk and hook up and do a show and get applauded by hundreds of people. That's not really what I want anymore. My values are changing and it's confusing. I'm cutting out a lot of people and I'm adding a lot of people. Even with all of that, with my brain being completely scrambled, like refiguring out who I am as a man at fucking 40, I still wake up and go to sleep happier every night because I don't have that. I still have a ton of guilt and shame from like past stuff, but I wake up every day knowing that I'm trying my best in the day before, like compared to where I was, this is where I should be. But it's a lot, man. It's hard. It's way harder to be in the short term. It's way harder to be a better person than it's easy to be a shitbag. It's easy, dude. Even like, I was talking to a girlfriend of mine the other night who's like a porn actress, and I was venting to her where there was a girl that I said no to hooking up with nicely, but I was like, hey, I think you probably want something more. I don't think this will be fair. I don't want to hurt you. And briefly, I talked her down, thank God. Briefly, she was pissed at me, and I had that thought where I'm like, God, would it have just been easier to fuck her and then ghost her? Because women are just used to that. And it's like, oh, that's just a guy being a guy. Whereas now I'm having like a breakup conversation with a girl I just met on Instagram. Yeah. And this seems like a fucking waste of the day. But you got to just kind of like take a deep breath and know that while it is harder to do the harder thing or whatever, it's going to pay off in the long run. I fucking hope so. Or at least you can know that you took the high road.
Yeah. Well, I mean, regret and anxiety are probably the two most pointless emotions you can feel, in my opinion. It's like,
please go on, because those are my jam.
So the Dalai Lama said once, I'm paraphrasing, but there's only 2 days in a year that nothing can be done, yesterday and tomorrow, right? So it's like the swell of regret that you feel must immediately be absorbed and turned into some kind of retributive purpose.
Right.
Like you have to, if you just feel the regret, then it becomes punitive, and in that way it's not useful for you. Right. But if you absorb the regret and say, you know what, I'm going to make better decisions or whatever the fuck else.
Yeah.
That helps.
No, that's a really good point. So it's like, I had this affair that torpedoed my life 10 years ago. And if I just went, you're a piece of shit every day, nothing. But if I can use that to be like, well, I'm not going to do that again. Like, at least now we're getting something out of it. When the shame creeps up, you have to, and especially with social media and cancel culture and stuff like that, you have to remind yourself who you are now. Because some fucking rando on Instagram, they could say who they think you are. And not absorbing that and just being like, hey man, I know the man I am now. I know who I'm trying to be. But it takes practice, like anything, because it's easy to shame spiral. And here's something I've started doing because of this show. It's like half you, half Jesus. So good work being in that group.
Good work on his part.
And yeah, both of you guys.
Well, I mean, it's. I think it's a compliment more for him than me.
Yeah, sure. But like, I started. It started with picking up trash, which I don't know why I didn't do that. Even when I was like a lefty environmentalist, I just felt like kind of gross. But you use that example a lot. But then, I heard people complain so much everyone's complaining about the homeless problem in Austin, which is really bad. And I was like, I'm just gonna start making food and like going down there. And so I've done it like 3 times now in the last 2 weeks, and have become like friends with a lot of these guys. And I was having a conversation with this guy, Cody. He's in a wheelchair. He's kicked heroin for 2 months. He's a vet. And he was talking about how he beats himself up a lot. And this ties into what we were talking about. There's a difference between holding yourself accountable and growing, which is good. And that's what you were talking about. But if you do the other thing we were talking about, if you just spiral in shame and beat yourself up, even though it could feel it's sort of masking itself as, accountability or discipline, that self-hate is so brutal that it'll actually drive you back to the bad habit, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you're dieting and you're just like, don't be a fat piece of shit, you're going to feel like a piece of shit. And what does a fat piece of shit do? Goes and eats whatever they want because they're hating themselves. And so you have to find a way to balance that discipline. I think it was like, I don't know. Anytime I don't know a quote, I just say it's Brene Brown whenever it's like a self-helpy quote. But there's this one quote I heard where it was like, talk to yourself like you would talk to someone you love. Because if I talk to someone I love the way I talk to myself, I would go to fucking jail. If I was just like, you piece of shit, what the fuck are you doing? If I was talking to like my mom that way, I'd be locked up. I'm so mean to myself, and we're so mean to ourselves. And I think that sometimes we think it's, no, I'm just being like David Goggins. I'm just being hard. I'm just being, tough. But I think you can be that kind of tough and you can be driven and you can want to improve yourself without also being like, I'm a piece of garbage. Because if you think you're a piece of garbage, you're going to go do garbage shit.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's like mental broken window theory.
Yeah.
Yeah, these I'm always surprised at how these motivational types become so popular. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a disconnect from my perspective, but they sell millions and millions of dollars worth of books and shit. And yeah, that I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, people are desperate because I remember I started reading a bunch of that stuff over quarantine. So like right before quarantine, my cat died and then my girlfriend left. And then quarantine happened. Mm-hmm. And it was the first year I was ever single. I was talking to my dad about this the other day, and he was like, yeah, you finally listened to my advice. And I'm like, no, I didn't. It was a global pandemic. Yeah. It was God is the only reason I wasn't codependent for a year. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do the fucking just sad, unsexy, divorced guy version of Eat, Pray, Love. And I was like, I'm going to find myself. And I started meditating and going out into the woods and doing psilocybin. And the first place I looked, because spirituality and religion always weirded me out, that before I dug into Buddhism or certainly Jesus stuff, I just bought self-help because it seems like this sort of secular version. And for me, it was that, and dude, you get addicted. Same deal with everything we talked about is I'll be a chapter into one and they quote, let's say Brene Brown quotes Tony Robbins. I go, oh, I got to buy that Tony Robbins book. And you buy it the same way. This is for the jiu-jitsu people listening again. When all the white belts are just spending hundreds of dollars on instructional videos, but they are going to the gym twice a week and they don't know how to escape from side control. It's like you think that the sort of easy secret is going to be in this instructional video or like this is going to be the book that helps me. And dude, half those books, I didn't retain anything. I didn't take notes. I don't know if I put anything into practice, but while you're reading it, you're just going, I am bettering myself. But the bottom line is you got to do the hard thing and you got to go out and get out of your, you know how many times I talked about the homeless or attacked conservatives for being what I saw as not compassionate to homeless. And again, now at age 40 is the first time I gave money. I was always nice to homeless people. This is the first time I've ever fed them. This is the first time I ever bought them clothes. This is the first time I ever fucking asked one of their names, which I think is almost more important. And that took me to 40 years old. While meanwhile, I'm sure I have plenty of tweets being like, if you don't care about the homeless, you're a piece of shit, whatever. And yeah, man, it's a lot harder to go out in a sketchy neighborhood and get rejected and have some guys look at you and they're like, I want fucking drugs, dude. I don't want your stupid sandwich. And you feel dumb and you want to get angry at them. And there's all these emotions and I still get to go home to like a warm fucking place. It's much harder, but it's actually doing the work.
Yeah. Jesus' brother said that actually. I believe faith without works is dead is the actual quote.
That's it. Yeah.
But yeah, it's this is why I don't criticize activists without first considering their point. Because I think just because you don't like or appreciate the way somebody goes about trying to get involved in a solution, because a lot of the time it's virtue signaling or just pedantic nonsense. Right. But that doesn't mean that the problem doesn't exist.
Right, man.
You know, so for a very long time, liberals in America have tried to deal with social issues, whether it be marriage equality shit or civil rights, generally speaking, or homelessness or inner city poverty. And because conservatives didn't appreciate the way they went about it, they tuned out of that whole conversation. Okay. And if you dismiss yourself from a conversation about policy in your community, then, well, I guess I can just quote Plato here. If you refuse to take part in your own governing, then you're doomed to be ruled by fools, right? So it doesn't do you or your cause any good to take your ball and go home.
Yeah.
Just because you don't, like Antifa, if I had the opportunity, I would smash each one of them into pieces individually.
Right. Which again, that's taking action.
Yeah. But wouldn't really accomplish any goal. So, you know, I'm not going to do that. But to what is the root cause of the complaint? A lot of youth in America are disaffected by the way that the corporate structure, confluence with government, has robbed them of their agency and identity and their ability to fucking create upward mobility for themselves.
Yeah.
That is exactly what's going on in the inner city.
Yep.
Right? And the conservatives would say to those Pacific Northwest white kids, why don't you just start a business? And that message never got packaged and carried into the inner cities in America because conservatives didn't have the temerity to go there because they thought they weren't wanted.
Right.
Or whatever. That's not the answer, man.
I've said this on other shows before, but it's such a good example, and I really like to give. I quoted you on my podcast with Tim Kennedy, and I've quoted you with Glenn Beck. Your trash quote I quote on all the podcasts, and this Tim Kennedy story I quote. So the Tim Kennedy one was when I only knew him from UFC stuff. I went to follow his Instagram, and I go, oh, Jesus, this guy's as fucking right-wing as you can get. We are not going to get along. Somehow, a couple months later, we end up podcasting together. We got along. He invited me to do one of the sheepdog courses, which if you guys don't know, sheepdog response to teacher.
Which one? Protector one, probably?
It was Protector one, yeah. And so it's situational awareness, firearms or defensive firearms, grappling, so basic self-defense grappling, and then grappling with weapons, which I've never done before. Fucking ruled. And you know, when I first showed up, I was like, oh, these are all the guys I've yelled at Twitter. Like, I was really nervous. And, like, I sat in the back. And me and one of my girlfriends from jiu-jitsu went together. And I remember, and the course was great. The instructors are all friends of mine now. And I remember I went up to Tim at the end where I go, hey, man, like, I'm going to promote this, you know, obviously as a thank you, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, oh, I don't need another white guy promoting this. There were no cameras. We weren't filming anything. And I go, what do you mean? And he's like, I don't just need this to look like a militia. Like he made some joke. And he's like, I want women, Jews, Muslims, LGBT people. I want people who are victimized in here. And it was that moment. And I had already unfollowed him on Instagram because I'm like too conservative. It was this moment where I was like, fuck, dude. Compared to all of my woke journalist friends who spent all day trashing conservatives online, if they saw a gay dude getting beat up, who do you think's going to run to protect that gay guy? You and Tim or them? Like, no fucking way are they going to do anything. No fucking way are they going to go hands-on. They're going to tweet about it later and make it about them. And to me, I was just like, dude, you doing that for those communities is more than I ever did for those communities. And I just assumed wrongly that you would be like against them. And I think like that's this perfect example of not only was he not what I thought he was, but he was actually doing a better job than the people that I was aligning myself with.
Yeah, he operates from this premise, and not just Tim, but a lot of our buddies, that it's kind of a bastardization of teach a man to fish, but it goes something like fight for a man and he'll be protected today, teach him how to fight. And not only is he protected, but now he can protect others.
That's it.
Right.
For sure.
And it's a problem, right? That we think we want to fucking we want to edge up to an issue, blurt out our fucking thoughts on it, spike the football and walk away.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is like, I don't know. I assume that that's social media and the media in general, just having heard debates over the years from political candidates and stuff. It's not new. That's
no, well,
for sure.
media was essentially doing what social media was doing before social media blew up, where MSNBC had their talking points, Fox News had their talking points.
Forget about cable news and look at the campaign. Look at FDR's first and second campaign for president.
Yeah,
it was particularly bad.
Yeah,
and
or I don't know much about it.
Look at Rutherford B. Hayes' successful run for president that Western Union and the Associated Press essentially helped him steal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like these things have been going on a lot longer than just social media. I think it just became the average person didn't think like that.
Right.
And they weren't privy to what was going on behind the scenes, so they thought everything was happening in good faith.
Yeah.
And then once social media started, and I think people are still shocked right now about how nobody operates in good faith anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think it's frankly, I think that is the divide between not the political parties, but people of differing political beliefs.
Well, and I even still catch myself. I've talked shit this entire hour, but like I still have to catch myself where if something happens in the news on Tuesday and I have a little more left-wing point of view on it, but I did Glenn Beck's show on Monday and I go, I just got like 1,000 new followers. This is going to be the first thing they see. And it's like, it doesn't matter. If it's something I believe and I can say it in an authentic way that's true to me, that's also open for pushback, then fucking tweet it, dude.
Yeah.
Or shut the fuck up till you learn more about it. And then maybe your opinion's going to change by tomorrow, which is usually the case, right? Like, I mean, look at the shooting that just happened in Colorado Springs. How many suddenly every half an hour there was just like a new thing added that completely contradicted the narrative of some political group that tried to own it for their own the day before.
Well, you're not hearing too much in the media about that now.
It went away very fast.
Or the kid or that dum-dum in Virginia who shot up his employees.
Oh, yeah. Was that Walmart. The Walmart one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't hear any follow-up on that.
Okay, he's a black dude, so it's not news.
So it went away.
Right? Which I think is the whole gun. Maj Toure talks about this all the time, but gun control began racist back in the day. Like that was the whole point, was to keep black people from getting guns, and persist today.
Oh yeah,
entirely racist. So
when the Black Panthers had guns, they were like, maybe we do something about this.
Less than 2% of gun crimes, murders specifically, are committed with rifles of any kind, much less what these retards call assault rifles, which is not a thing.
And by the way, these are statistics that most people on the other side, they just don't know.
Well, if they don't know it at this point, that's kind of on them, to be honest, because 70% of gun murders happen with handguns in inner cities. Right. So it's like we are leaving a very large portion of our population behind.
Well, and this is an example where it's like, instead of not talking about it, it's like, if you want to help these communities, you have to be honest about it. You have to be honest if a shooter is transgender or non-binary. You have to be honest if a shooter is black. You have to be honest if the guy who stopped the shooting was a white dude with a gun. You know, like, because when we're actually honest about the facts, then we can come up with solutions. But instead it just turns into, you know, it turned out that this person was non-binary. And it's like, well, cool, but a bunch of people still fucking died. And by the way, the left was doing it before. Look, another shooting. It's all these right-wing pundits who are demonizing, you know, the trans community or whatever. And it should be so fucking simple to be like, hey, all murder's bad, right? Like if you're shooting up a place, it's bad, whether you're white, black, non-binary, fucking, you know, in a wheelchair, whatever. I mean, if you're in a wheelchair and you pull it off, good for you. No matter who the shooter is, bad. No matter who the victims are, fucking sad. That if you are putting on sexual events for kids, bad. If you're just a normal suburban gay person, you're probably not a fucking groomer and you're just trying to live your life. Like, you can hit things with nuance, but you don't profit off of nuance and you don't get retweets that way.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is the case. But what are you going to do? You know?
Yeah.
Drive on.
Keep doing this stuff.
Yeah. Well, this has been fun. Appreciate you coming today.
Thanks, man. Can I promote my little podcast?
Yeah.
You got to come on that, by the way. Jesse's been on it a couple times. So I have it's a mental health comedy podcast. It's called Advice Not Taken. It is mental health and political stuff, but not from a self-righteous point of view, knowing that like I'm going through the problems still. It's not a Tony Robbins thing where I'm like, if you want to feel better, use your cold plunge and then go like, I'm still fucking figuring it all out. So Advice Not Taken, you can go to jamiekilsteinpodcast.com or just search Advice Not Taken on Spotify or iTunes, and then make my Twitter and Instagram a little less toxic. My Twitter is at Jamie Kilstein and my Instagram is at the Jamie Kilstein.
Sweet. Well, I appreciate you coming today.
Dude, I appreciate the show.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate you all for listening. This has been Citizen.